am thinking that we ought to get started. Mary Jo, you think we ought to get started now? Absolutely. Good morning and welcome to Montview Boulevard Presbyterian Church here in Park Hill in Denver, Colorado. I'm Malcolm, and on behalf of the Adult Faith Formation, we present the spirituality and the African American art, exploring connections. And we welcome those who are watching online as well. Good morning to you. Welcome. Today, our featured speaker will be the great poet of Colorado, Theo Wilson, one of my heroes. Native of Denver, member of Shorter AME Church. Theo Wilson is the founder of the Denver Slam Nuba team that won the National Poetry Slam in 2011. He began his speaking career in the NAACP at the age of 15 and has always had a passion for social justice. His 2017 TED Talk entitled "A Black Man Goes Undercover in the Alt-Right" amassed more than 12 million viewers. In 2022, he produced his own show, I Was There, on the History Channel, 12 seasons. I don't know if any of you saw that or not. 12 seasons of I Was There on the History Channel. And he has worked with numerous organizations to help others find healing through art. I don't know how long I've been knowing Theo, but I know that he's an icon. He's a cultural icon within our community, within the city of Denver. You can go online, you can hear him, you can go to some of his speeches, his band. I found out this morning that he has his own band, and they performed last night. So he said he's a little dry in the singing part, but he can still do his thing. And he's been a very encouraging person to our young people, and he gets along with the older folks and the younger people, and he's been just an instrument of God. And as some of you heard him playing the piano as you came in. So at this time, I want to welcome poet Theo Wilson to the table, to the podium. They say if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And this brother is at the table. Thank you.
Hi. How you doing? That's good. I really appreciate you all inviting me. I really appreciate you all wanting to listen to what I got to say. I'm very, blown away by this epoch that we are in. I'd be on Zoom calls and they'd be like, how you doing? And I'm like, oh. I'm fine, other than navigating an existential sense of dread and terror. I am great. I am wonderful. So, we have always been in this thing together. Always. I heard this dude named Wayne Dyer. You ever heard this dude named Wayne Dyer? He had a haircut like mine. Wayne Dyer said the wisdom of a round planet cannot choose sides. The interconnectivity, the way that we are woven together, is the fundamental backdrop that shows why injustice is wrong. In my neighborhood, when you do something that hurts yourself in the end, they call that hustling backwards. When you shoot yourself in the foot, that's hustling backwards. You try to hurt somebody else and it ends up blowing back and hurting you, that's hustling backwards. I'm gonna give you a little life hack. Racism is hustling backwards. Always has been. I'm speaking today because they trying to make Black History Month illegal, and it's so whack. It's so whack. Like, dude, You can't make the facts not have happened just because you don't want to talk about them. The facts just be facting. That's what they do. And I always thought to those folks, I always wanted to say to those folks, the folks who say, we don't like critical race theory. Like, what even is that? Do you know where that came from? Okay. Or like Black history and things that are challenging to the American narrative. If you personally didn't do these racist acts, then why are you taking the acts of racists so personally? If you didn't do it, let's talk about it objectively. You wasn't there, right? You didn't own no slaves? Great. I wasn't a slave? Great. The impact of those actions still manifests with us. And we're going to talk about history today in the way that I heard our friend Neville Goddard. Who knows Neville Goddard? Neville Goddard was this dude who was amazing Christian theologist, like philosopher, pastor. And he said, we're thinking about time wrong. History does not recede into the past. It carries with us into the future. History carries with us into the future. Once you get this in your head, now we talk about history differently. The title of my talk today is America, the Reckoning. The Reckoning. When we face ourselves, when we look in the mirror, there's always a reckoning. Pregnant in the womb of time are the fruits of these actions that planted as seeds. There's going to be a reckoning, right? And either when it comes to the integrity of your actions, the bill comes due or it all pays off. Either the bill comes due or it all pays off. And for America, the bill has come due. We're going to talk about it. And I want to talk about it beginning with one of our founding fathers, actually. This dude, Thomas Jefferson, is a very interesting character for various reasons. We ain't going to go into all those reasons, but Thomas Jefferson was a very interesting character. And one of the things about Thomas Jefferson is the way he wrote in this salient moral clarity, even when he wasn't morally clear all the time, as we know. I heard a quote of Thomas Jefferson from an unlikely source. This dude you also may have heard of called the Reverend Louis Farrakhan. I heard in the Million Man March in 1995, every black man was glued to the TV watching Farrakhan and the Million Man March. He quoted Thomas Jefferson, and in this quote he said, Jefferson says, "I tremble for this nation when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." I tremble for this nation when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. That's Farrakhan quoting Jefferson. So I said, let me go to the source. What was Jefferson talking about? Well, that quote is from an essay that Thomas Jefferson wrote called Notes on the State of Virginia. If you ain't read Notes on the State of Virginia, I'm about to give you the Cliff Notes right now. The origin of Notes on the State of Virginia was ultimately a moment of clarity that Jefferson had during him administering a beating to one of his slaves. That's the origin. And in that essay, I'm going to paraphrase here because, they had a different eloquence back in the 18th century. He said, if one should find occasion for the intemperance of passion to beat one's slave, one should always make sure you do it when your child is not present. Jefferson finds himself in a moment of clarity, whipping his slave, and his child, his legitimate child, is watching him. And Jefferson realizes in that moment that he is demonstrating a behavior that, if replicated into the next generation, could erode the soul of America on the white side of the racial divide. He saw in this moment of clarity that as his child saw him, his child was being modeled by him loosed passions of rage, anger, violence. Jefferson saw that he was literally portraying a very un-American version of himself. This tension between our ideals and our practices was a seed at the beginning of this country that has blossomed out and branched out into many different facets that seem like a multi-headed hydra at this point. But if you look at the beginning, the seed, it was quite simple. America was having trouble living up to its principles via its practices. It was having trouble with that. It was a schism. It was a split. And in the very beginning, Jefferson saw how this could come back on America. He said, a nation rises and falls on its discipline, on its industry, on its integrity. Social scientists call that social cohesion. The way in which people bond together is eroded when injustice is present. These are the things that we're grappling with now, and they are so big and massive that they are institutional now, right? But at the fundamentals of it, it's just simply the integrity of dealing with folks justly. We can talk about all the things that have branched out since then, from the Civil War, right? All of the ways in which America has grappled with its principles and its practices. I believe that this fundamental schism is why Black history is so hard to be taught in this country. Because of all the branches of history, Black history kind of keeps ledger of the practices, you know? Black history kind of keeps a tally. Black history, low-key, is like white history. It's actually like white history. If you think about it. Like, if you think about Black history, it's really like what Black people did to overcome the things that like white people did to them. You know what I'm saying? That's what Black history mostly be. He's the first Black person to thus and thus. Well, it's not that he was like the first one qualified. It's just that it's the first one they let in. You know what I'm saying? That's what was really going on here. And the saddest part about it is that this harmed white people too. It harmed on so many levels. White folks are just the lightest-skinned indigenous folks on the planet. Like, ultimately. Like, before this thing called whiteness was created, folks were Irish and German and Polish. Before this construct, folks were French and English. And they had dances, man. They did. Pretty cool dances, actually. They had songs. They did. And even before the Roman expansion into the rest of Europe, like, European folks lived pretty much like we recognize Native Americans live. Like, European people, just the lightest-skinned indigenous people. Whiteness is a construct, man. It's just a thing that was invented to create a caste system by some folks who had a weird idea about hierarchy. That's it. And when Europeans came over here, they were forced to let that go. Don't you speak none of that German. You got beat for that. If you're Irish, don't speak none of that Gaelic. You got beat for that. Right? So on one side, Black folks was at the bottom of the caste system, and on the other side, European people were being mass processed into white people. And you lost something in there. And every time somebody tries to say, hey, this is hurting other folks, please wake up from the American dream and look at the reality. They'd be like, that person's too woke. They keep waking me up. I want to go back to American dreaming, and you're interrupting the process, buddy, with all that wokeness. And we're saying, if you don't wake up, you are headed for a cliff. Please wake up. We got a tally of the receipts here that says what's really going on. And so throughout American history, we see this thing where America has these bubbles of hope and the muscle memory of empire keep on popping it. It keeps happening. After the Civil War, which if you look at it spiritually was a bloodletting for the attachment to the profits of slavery, a blood attachment, a sacrifice was spilled because of that, right? There was this opening. Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about this in his book called We Were 8 Years in Power. He talks about this where there was this minute in history during the Reconstruction era where as long as Northern troops were in the South enforcing some form of equality, there was this vision that we might actually have a post-racial society in the 1870s. Can you believe it? They're writing about that, right? We saw black folks getting into public office. We saw black folks creating communities, white and black coalitions going on. How about that, right? And then the muscle memory of empire comes in and pops the bubble. The betrayal of 1877, election of Rutherford B. Hayes. They didn't want to accept the election of Rutherford B. Hayes. They said, okay, well, we'll accept it, but you got to get these Northern troops out of here. That's the beginning of Jim Crow. Didn't start right after the Civil War. There was a period, right? Civil rights movement, right? A century of Jim Crow. Here comes the civil rights movement, right? And it looks like things might go a little bit the way they're supposed to go. I'm suddenly born sometime in the 80s. Here I go, right? I pop into a world where 1863 and 1963 might as well have been the same year to me. That's what it looked like from the perspective of an 80s kid, right? And that's where I'll give you my first of two poems. I got to break it down, and I'm going to build you up. I'm going to build you up. I'm not going to leave you where I'm about to take you. I have to warn you. This is a realistic reckoning. So me as a poet, I have found that slam poetry is the last place you can tell the whole truth, nothing but truth, so help you God. So I do that through poetry. This first poem of two poems is called The Anthem. And here's how it goes. I got to back up and do the poetry thing, you know what I'm saying? I'm coming up. The fantasy of Santa Claus is proof that parents are psychotic. But mine were truth lovers who spared me this temporary insanity. So why did they let me believe in America? My childhood was a star-spangled Christmas carol, the 80s. Rocky, Reaganomics, Jam Master, James Brown, Cosby, Michael, Pepsi, Prince, Springsteen, the Wheaties Box, Tyson, The Last Dragon, Breaking, the gosh darn Summer Olympics, and a black boy with a Gumby haircut, hand over his heart, pledging allegiance and meaning that mess. It is amazing what belief can do to the mind of a child. I was the best artist at Bromwell Elementary. Could draw an eagle so realistic, you could cut out the feathers and stick one on Chief Red Cloud's headdress. So there should have been red flags raised when on self-portrait day, I drew myself perfectly Caucasian. Gee, I wonder where black kids learn to reject themselves. Don't believe the self-hate slavery narrative. I'm not interested in effects, but causes. You see, when you mention this great country and its anthems to freedom, purple mountains of opportunity, just courts, dignified policing, and living wage. And my people don't know what you're talking about? Because you superimpose these beautiful words over a Medusa-faced life experience, when those of us who think we tasted the pie only did so by sneaking in with enough green to mask the black of our bloodline, you begin to realize that these beautiful anthems weren't written for you. Because when your skin is the only barrier from life, liberty, and justice, some of us no longer want to wear it, Clarence Thomas. This is not a political poem. This is not a political poem. It's an unrequited love story. So America, Yes, I would love you if you ever existed, but you could forge Santa Claus's name on the Bill of Rights. That mess don't make him a founding father. But we're a bunch of kids caroling under the flag like a Christmas tree, hoping America gonna come down the chimney with a bag of freedom. And that's the only time we treat each other kindly? Well, in denial, acting as if, well, they couldn't build monuments to it if it weren't real. But I see statues of Mickey Mouse all the time. He has a constitution, ways in which he would govern himself if he existed in the real world. See, America is really an amusement park called Land of the Free. Problem is, you got to pay to get in. That's not the problem. Name me one person willing to kill a Muslim for Donald Duck. To starve Mexicans when we burn down their vendors outside. But strap yourself into the Middle Passage water park ride. Cotton candy's free, just pick it from the Willy Wonka plantation. The founding fathers would have thought Obama's business suit was a mighty hot outfit for him to pick their cotton in. Then beat him till he stopped calling himself Barack. But anyone who thinks that slavery only harmed black people generationally has never really looked into Sandy Hook, or Jim Jones, or Jeffrey Dahmer, child porn rings. Did you really think you could massacre a bunch of Powhatan Indians, go home and touch your wife the same? To teach your son to check his misguided aggressions, to tell him why all of his bedtime stories have traces of indigenous blood on them, like all murders have traces of suicide, white America. Erasing your history just makes you repeat it more efficiently. And the sins of the fathers have homing beacons centuries long. They explode like genetic addictions because like somehow you can't stop cracking the whip because bondage is the basis for successful business models. And you have never heard of masters escaping their plantations or corporations. You were hooked more hopelessly than the slaves are. But when your power is so great, nobody could tell you the truth, then your karma need not come from anybody but you. See, Malcolm X didn't take down Enron. Chief Sitting Bull didn't chair Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Bobby Seale didn't cause this economic collapse. Cesar Chavez did not fund, train, and recruit for Al-Qaeda. It was you, America. Slave nation, now slave to international bankers. Federal Reserve Act of 1913. You sniped your conscience on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in '68 back in Memphis, Tennessee. You cannot stand for freedom with a wounded knee. When the Constitution is the CIA's favorite brand of toilet paper. When your best weapons are named for the tribes you have slaughtered. Black Hawk, Comanche, Tomahawk, Apache. When Lincoln's voice cannot be heard over the Cannon Symphony, when Washington's heroism is about as real as Wolverine's, it means that you've fallen so far short of your Christian ideals you had to invent another savior for the holidays. The fantasy of Santa Claus is proof that parents are psychotic. And maybe I'm still that patriot, but the rocket's red glare has burned the wool from my eyes. I see you for what you never became. America, you looking like a star-spangled abortion. Because we the people ain't never been a nation. Just a bunch of children who were born here trying to make it, but these well-meaning principles have cost too many lives to act like they have been lived up to. But the band plays on, the anthem's blaring, hands still over our hearts beating red, white, and broken. Thank you. Black history is not only American history, it is our compass forward by telling you what not to do no more. By finding these hope bubbles and saying more of that. By looking at the American dream, you begin to realize that it is only as real as how well it does by black folk and indigenous folk. And those who Christ would say are the least of these. That is when the American dream is the realest. That was Barack Obama's whole appeal. I come from a Kenyan farmer and a lady from Kansas. And together, we're going to make hope real in America. They said it couldn't be done. And we said, yes, we can. Remember that guy? right? Right? What made the guy, that was his whole selling thing. If he could be the president, we all could be, right? That was his thing, right? The American dream is as real as it is for the least of us. That's it. My grandfather was the best patriot I ever knew. My grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman, true story. He was one of the first black men to take to the air. Theobald George Wilson of the 99th Pursuit Squadron is where I got my name and my blood from, okay? Now, my grandfather, he had an interesting take on American patriotism because he wrote about how he was treated worse than the German POWs on the base. He wrote about that. And then he wrote about how American ideals and the idea of this country kept folks alive in the concentration camps. He saw how when the world adopted American ideals, ideals that started here, their countries got better. And that the process of us striving for those ideals, that mighty fight that we have in us as Americans, that was his patriotism. What none of this edited history, what none of this America is only 1776. No, America is also 1619. It's both of them. It is both freedom taker and chain breaker. It is both. America, like somebody who needs to integrate its shadow. You need to do some Jungian psychology, America. You need to look at them things you're not facing. The whole thing is not eliminating the shadow, it's learning from it. You got to look at the dark side. And when you integrate them, you are empowered to a new level. You become more than the sum of its parts. The patriotism that my grandfather had is very similar to the patriotism that I saw in this other fella you might have heard of named Dr. Martin Luther King. You ever heard of Dr. Martin Luther King? Has anybody heard of that guy? Yeah, he's kind of an obscure activist, whatever, but yeah. This guy, Dr. Martin Luther King, very interesting character. We made a lot to do about this fella on the Cliff Notes version of his life. They got like 5 talking points. Montgomery bus boycott, and then letter from a Birmingham jail, and then I have a dream, and then Selma, and then assassinated. That's pretty much the 5 talking points they give you about Dr. Martin Luther King. It was the last 4 years of his life that I find more interesting. He began to reckon with the fact that we are wrestling about the soul of this country. He said there's a 3-headed dragon here: racism, militarism, and poverty. Racism, militarism, and poverty. And a year before he was assassinated, to the day, he gave his speech on why he was opposed to the Vietnam War. To the day. Co-written by our Vincent Harding here. He passed away, he was assassinated, he was murdered before we got to actually grapple with that the right way. But it was still the ideals. It was the ideas that we could strive for, but we wouldn't be able to do it unless we actually confronted these things. I am fascinated by what America could be, yo. Look what we could be. Look what we have the potential to become. This bigotry is costing us literally financially. They did a study, Citigroup did a study that said just anti-black racism alone over 20 years, and lost opportunities, the amount of redlining that keeps folks poor, lost wages, cost America about $16 trillion. Over the course of 20 years, $16 trillion. That's a lot of money, right? What could we do with that? Well, what we could do with that is what we're seeing a lot of other nations doing. Man, they got some nice high-speed rail in Sweden. Man, they got some nice new architecture in China. Man, they got some amenities in Japan you wouldn't believe. Man, America look better overseas than it do here. When they don't blow all this money oppressing their minorities, it's hurting you, America. You hustling backwards. You hustling backwards. But here's what's most interesting. The dream. The dream that Dr. King talked about. I heard a Muslim cleric say it best. He said that the many hues of humanity are pieces of a mosaic that form the very face of God. That's what we could be. And it could start right here. And if anything we're redeeming about America, it's the fighting spirit that we have. Now, we up against a little bit of opposition right now, if you haven't noticed. Things are a little sketchy. All right? But what I'm seeing already is la résistance. It's already showing up. And if I was to bet my bottom dollar, I would say that there's going to be a part of this resistance that's going to be rooted in my community. My community always be having the fighters. It's just what happens. That's just how the chips be falling. And we inspire other folks to fight, but I'll be doggone it. Generally, that resilient spirit of America that keeps on bouncing back is one of the things that make me proudest to be black. It's one of the things that make me proudest. That I got all this resilience, that calorie per calorie, it took a lot for my DNA to be here. The calorie per calorie from my genetic code to exist in 2025 overcame a whole lot of not wanting it to be in 2025. It took a lot. Somebody said, I got at least one superhero in my bloodline. And that's what I celebrate today in my second poem. The first time I heard spoken word done, it was my cousin Jamie. She did this poem called Maya Angelou called Still I Rise. Y'all ever heard that? Still I Rise was the first poem I ever heard in a spoken performance. So I said, this is the remix. This is called Still We Rise. And it goes like this. I can't wait to share this with you. And still we rise. Maya told me of the greatness we'll become. You know, you could take the black man out of Africa. His heart beats still the drum. And America rose to the rhythm of my resilience. History's greatest survival story written while they was killing us by the millions, still black and brilliant. You know, nothing supposedly inferior could survive that march from the interior. Plus them ships, whips, and shackles, plantations trying to put fear in us. But if you had to resort to whipping me viciously just to stop me from literacy, then this deadly pen right here gonna be the enemy to white supremacy. Rigging every system against me just to cop your green. Yeah, homie, ask Diana Ross, you are not supreme. Imagine handcuffing a boxer already still defeats you. But after pieces on the chessboard, I just took your queen, dude. If I slammed every door on black folk and they dared to squeeze through, then it's just like Harvey Weinstein. I'd be scared of me too. Because still we rise. Burning bright as the eye of God when it banged light through the void, as black as the death of a sun, black like the kinks in Harriet Tubman's hair, reborn as the rifling grooves inside of Huey P. Newton's gun. I'm a slave song dancing off of Ray Charles's fingertips. I'm the cotton thorns in Mahalia Jackson's gospel riffs. I'm Louis' trumpet blending voodoo and Christ through cracked lips. I am MJ moonwalking over broken memories of blackness. I am surviving self-hatred even when preached from the pulpit, the kind that made Africans burn their kings till they straightened to bullwhips. And if you look how far we come, you'd be so shocked it'll leave you breathless, like the ghost of Thomas Jefferson at Obama's re-election. Give me the alchemy of a rapper taking the lead from the bullets inside of his body and melting them down. I want melting them down in the platinum records for us. It's like Bob Marley rolling up and smoking Willie Lynch's ashes, and it's hailing the words to the first verse of Exodus, Movimiento cha People. And this poem is dedicated to the in denial Black American that travels to Africa every time they step in front of their reflection. To the Latinos who carry African stolen gold in their complexions. To the Congolese women who were systemically violated due to tribal warfare. And to them white kids who would rather die than repeat the crimes of their father's affairs. Stand with us. Sing a freedom song so clear it shatters the receiver inside Dr. King's wiretap phone, piercing the clouds and back down to the sound reverberates of the titanium in Malcolm's backbone, till Africans rise up from the Atlantic like goosebumps from your skin, lightning flashing like the flame from Huey's gun, burning bright as the eye of God when it banged light through the void. Is black is the death of a son, and still we rise. Thank you.
Theo Wilson. Woo! What a treat. We ought to have him come to the main sanctuary, huh? Power to the people. Theo Wilson.
Appreciate that.
At this time, we're going to open up the floor to questions you may have for Theo. Anyone? Don't all speak at the same time. Marilyn, Diane.
How do you feel that you come to writing your poetry? Do you feel that it comes through spiritual connection with God, or just, if you could talk about that a minute?
There's definitely a spiritual component to it. Poetry became my religion in which I would write my own holy scriptures. I would never write a poem, or I would never share a poem until I was done processing its message through living it out. You understand? I seen poets could write poems real flowery, but it didn't have no impact unless they walked it. And my poetry began to be a part of my spirituality when I began to see my word as sacred. I read a book called The Four Agreements. And the Four Agreements said, be impeccable with your word. It's something we strive for. Ain't everybody there 100% of the time. But here's what I noticed. Because I was doing competitive poetry. Like, my poems had to be 3 minutes or less, and I would get judged like the Olympics. Somebody would put a score to my pain and suffering. That's how I used to make my money. And I realized my poetry became more powerful if I walked what I talked. And if I backed my words with action, soon enough, strangely, actions would back my words. I was speaking stuff out there, and it was all spiritual. And I found that when I lagged from my integrity to my word in general, my poetry seemed to weaken. I don't know, I can't prove this in the laboratory conditions now, but it seemed like that's what it was. So the reason, and I realized my poems hit people differently. They hit people. And I was like, oh, that's because of how I have incorporated them into my being. And I can go off my memory now because the poems are a part of me, see? So yes, there is a spiritual component for sure.
Would you say that your father had anything to do with the foundation?
Oh yeah, Pop, look, ain't gonna bring in my daddy. My father is a man named Sid Wilson. Yes, he's still with us. He is the founder of A Private Guide Incorporated, largest black tour guiding service. I watched my daddy process. My daddy had a tough life. My daddy from Brooklyn, man. He was a gangster. What saved him was two things, Malcolm X and the draft. Okay? My daddy was born in 1944. Okay? He was 21 when Malcolm X got killed. He had joined Malcolm's Organization for Afro-American Unity. He was at his first meeting. He said Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee was there. He got to talk to all of them. And then, after Malcolm died, he was getting pulled further and further into this thing, but he was pulled away from gang life, and then he got his draft card. So I met my daddy with a whole bunch of PTSD, and I watched him process that PTSD with books. My daddy's got a big esoteric library of books that ain't even in print no more, books from the 1800s, books that's just all about figuring out your inner world. And I saw the man, when he got laid off from his job, start that tour guiding business and revamp his mind. Now, my daddy seen his first murder when he was 9 years old. He hid in a dumpster and watched one of his buddies get killed by another one of his buddies in a fight with a knife. Okay? He had a lot to overcome. I said, well, if he can do that, this is light work, what I got to overcome. So yeah, Pops was making me read books far above my grade level. So that by the time I was in 8th grade, I was reading at a college level because I'm reading books from the 1800s. That English was different. And because I had to understand it, they kind of gave me a leg up rhetorically.
Anyone? Okay.
We got two, I see.
Karen?
Thank you so much for what you bring us today. I came across a video of you a long time ago that really shook me to the core about, I think it's got to do with the legacy of white men in particular in this culture, that sense that because we have not reckoned with all of our history, they feel completely at sea, they don't belong, they live in a culture where it's the illusion that you gotta make it on your own, all the stuff that comes with being white, and especially being male, and especially being a young white male in this country. One of the things that this congregation has done is to talk about white nationalism and this whole Christian right stuff that's going on. And what I remembered from hearing something that you spoke about many years ago was how we tend to alienate each other if we don't carry the right kind of politics. And rather than having conversations and building bridges with one another, we diss one another, and it makes those dissed young white men the perfect fodder for these Christian nationalists that come in and say, hey, bro, you belong to us, and we are going to be against everybody who doesn't carry your bloodline. And I just wonder if you want to say something to us about that, because that was just a huge wake-up call for all of us, really.
Thank you. These white boys on the alt-right was looking for tribe. They was looking for us. They was looking for a we. They saw the black kids say black power. They saw the brown kids say brown power. They didn't know why when they said white power was a problem. They was looking for a we. Did I realize as angry as I got and I'm like, what you mean why you can't say white power? Because, dude, the Holocaust, that's why. Because slavery, that's why. The indigenous genocide, that's why. I was like, oh, dude's missing context here. How would I get his context if I was born in his shoes? I wouldn't. It would be nowhere to be found. This is what happens when you erase your history. The robbery is the white we that is beyond whiteness. There's this big old gap in y'all history that we just white. Between you and France, even before Imperial France, between you and Ireland, between you and Italy, between you and Germany, before Germany went crazy. You know, like, there was a we there, and they were looking for that. And when they reached back for their history and their we, all they had that America gave them was a lynch rope and a bullwhip and a burning cross. So they was like, that's what we got. and then they weed their we around that. And I think that this culture's misapprehension of masculine energy, first of all, let's acknowledge horrific toxic masculinity did all the bad things. Let's just add that there. But have we done a good job at framing healthy masculinity? Positive masculinity, have we done that? A lot of people don't understand, like when you're a man, you're always dealing with the alpha dog crap of other men. Since you're a boy who can fight, who gets the girl, right? Now add money. Now add, you're a white dude, you're supposed to have it all. Well, I don't. I don't have it all. And Tucker Carlson and them ain't telling me the truth about why I don't have it all. And so now I got to figure this out. And if we got politics to be like, you have information that he needs. It's like critical information. You see what I'm saying? And so as a leftist, I'm lefty, liberal. Come on now. But I was like, dang, we include everybody except for the excluders. We don't like them. And of course, there's like, you got to set your boundaries with bullies. I get it. But there was a nuance between the dude who was just being a jerk and the dude who had a question that I didn't like. And it was up to me to figure out that nuance. Because if I could form a relationship, guess what I could do? De-radicalize. He doesn't run up in the Capitol on January 6th. He doesn't go buy a truck full of maneuver and become Timothy McVeigh. And each one matters. So that's why I had to sift through that. But they was just looking for a we. That's it.
Someone else had their hand up.
Thank you. You have been an inspiration to me.
Thank you, sir.
You talked about living it out. Most of the folks in these pews are white. How do we live it out?
Man, listen, you can't unwhite the white what it is, okay? You will be this for your incarnation. All right, that's what it is. I feel like we were all given our shell for a reason. I start there. My soul said, for your mission, should you choose to accept it, you will be born black and male in America. Now, we're going to give you a couple advantages. You're going to have straight teeth from your mama, you know. You're going to be able to grow a good beard because of your daddy. We're going to put you in a situation where you can learn how to fight. The rest is up to you, right? That was my soul assignment. I start there. What's my soul assignment? You're going to be able to get into places I can't get into. People going to say things around you they're not going to say around me. That's your mission. I think the most important thing, acknowledge the obvious. Acknowledge there'd be cultural differences. Now, you know, there'd just be cultural differences. Sometimes white church do their music a little differently than black church. Just a little different, you know. That's all right. There's cultural differences, right? The fun part about unity is our differences. That's the fun part. It's finding them. But one must never, if I had to say to a version of me that was white or born into a European descended body, I would say when it comes to white supremacy, don't believe the hype. You don't benefit. Dude, you don't win with this one. There's a great book. You want to do a reading club? I know you got our brother who showed up last week, but maybe the next book should be a book written by a sister called Heather McGee. Her book is called The Sum of Us. It's all the receipts of hustling backwards. Just hustling backwards. Look, it's one thing to be above black people because you severely depressed them, right? And now statistically you have better outcomes. But it ain't as good as you could be doing. if oppression wasn't present in the equation. They asked somebody, would you rather have $100,000 per year salary, knowing that the black folk around you was making $150,000, or would you have a $50,000 per year salary, knowing the black folk around you was making $25,000? You see where I'm going here? People be choosing the $50,000. That's where that 16 trillion went when Citigroup did that study on oppression. And you don't get to build your awesome Jetsons future like China does. You see where I'm going? And you don't get to do the proper defense spending just in case you get into a dust-up with them. See, it gets real when it comes to, like, our big dog ticket was that we could fight everybody. Iraq showed how you could beat America on a budget, right? You now losing the military edge, and they out-developing you, all because we're misapplying this thing wanting to be better because you chose 50,000, because you didn't want other folks making 125 even though you doubled your money. That's the hustle. See through that. Never fall for it. And understand that ultimately we are all connected. That's where I would go with that one.
Sound like Dick Gregory. Contemporary, modern Dick Gregory.
Thank you for being here. I kind of wonder how brave you have to be to enter a white space like this and how real you can be with us, and I appreciate that. So that's part of my question. Yeah. But my bigger question is, as a country of corporate greed, which I'm not even going to go down that path, but we don't know how to use the words, I'm sorry.
Sure don't.
And other countries who've had these atrocities of race and annihilation, like South Africa, like Germany, they know how to lament and how to apologize for their behavior. What's it going to take for America to do that all the way back to 1619?
You know what it's going to take?
Revolution?
Nope, getting their butt whipped. Hold up.
Yeah.
There's something to this. Germany got his butt whipped. It took a square knockout to the jaw. And the world stood on Germany's back, put his knee in his back and said, give me that swastika. Apologize to them Jewish folk. And America know you ain't gonna run up like that. America know you ain't ready to fight it like that. What you think all that $800 billion a year on defense spending is about? You understand where I'm going with this? South Africa got choked out. Somebody put it in a chokehold with them sanctions and said, you give up that apartheid. You give it up now. Nelson Mandela's the one who's supposed to lead this country. America need his butt whipped. Historically, that is the only way I've seen people properly apologize for racism. And I don't want to be here when that comes because it's going to be brutal. You understand what I'm saying? That I went to South Africa. Interesting you mentioned that. Brother Carl Bourgeois took me there 11 years ago. And the South African European a little different because they're in a situation where their version of Native Americans are still 80% of the population. Here in America, you could drive from sea to shining sea and not see one indigenous person and listen to all the country and Western you want and kick back and say, America the beautiful, all this is mine. But in the back of your mind, you know what defense spending is the difference. I took all this, you see? And so that is, I hate to say that, but that's the difference. And here's how I know God to work. See, God worked like this. God whispered the warning first. And then God said the warning sternly. And then God yelled the warning at you. And then God come with the nunchucks. But warning always come before destruction. And America done had plenty of warnings, plenty of them. Another term we have in our neighborhood called crash out. What's a crash out? It's just when you too stuck on stupid to stop yourself from having the worst possible outcome. Crash out. America on crash out time right now. You see what I'm saying? Now, from the ashes of that, good folks can build something. You never lose it because the truth just be truthing. But that's what that is, unfortunately. And I don't know how that's going to come, but that's historically what it's taken. In terms of my personal, courage or whatever, I've been black all my life. And I could never hide it. My family got a term called down the street black. You know he's black, 300 feet away. I am not ethnically ambiguous. I am what I am. And what's coming to me is coming to me. And I got a few tools in my bag to alchemize these situations. It is part of what gave me the wit and the rhetorical gift, the sense of humor, because I be sad. My wife, when she tells me goodbye, when I go out the door, it don't matter what we fighting about. I love you. And my mama would say it the same way. Black man, this might be the last time I see you. And every day I run through scenarios of my death at the hands of this country that I have to reckon with and still find a smile for my daughters with. That is a kind of internal gymnastics that I have gotten good at. And you just go out again and again and again. And after a while, you keep coming back home and you realize, well, something bigger than me got me out here. Something bigger than me gonna have to get me back. But if I keep on doing its work, it's gonna keep working for me. And that's how I land on that. You know?
One last question, and then we'll close it out.
What last question?
Dr. Lewis has a question.
Okay. Yeah. How you doing, sis?
How do you reconcile our struggle as Black people in the context of this stolen land? I've often said to my friends, didn't your mother teach you not to accept stolen goods? So I'm just curious about your take on that, because I'm struggling with it.
Let me tell you something. I spent time at the, it was a Lakota reservation in Gregory, South Dakota. I thought the hood was poor. I thought the hood was poor. Went to Pine Ridge in 2018. Went to the actual site of Wounded Knee. Came back, said, this ain't mine. This ain't mine. That's a hard thing for a grandson of a Tuskegee Airman to say. And if that I'm on the land of these folks, I better speak up for them if they ain't here. You heard in my poems, I mentioned the indigenous people. You got to know whose land this is. And it ain't mine. And it ain't mine. Now, there's a whole Stockholm syndrome that Black folks be going through. We got Stockholm syndrome sometimes. We be like, man, we the real Native Americans and Black folks was here and stuff like that. That might be true, bro, but that don't stop the robbery, my boy. I may have been a forced accomplice to this robbery, but it's part of why I've always identified as African. It's part of why. Because I don't want what ain't mine. And what I got is pretty awesome. On the other side of it, me being an African person and my DNA test confirmed I'm mostly from Ghana and Nigeria. So, you know, that's a thing. I've got the scientific proof to back it up. But the indigenous people in this place got a whole different kind of fight than we got. It's part of why I don't accept slavery as the original sin of America. I don't say that. You had to clear the land before you had to plant the cotton, didn't you? You had to clear the land first to plant the cotton. There's an order to this operation. The book, The Half Has Never Been Told. If you never read it, read The Half Has Never Been Told. They talk about how they would march the slave down by foot, 500-600 miles sometime, by foot. After they cleared the Shawnee with military force and fraudulent treaties, then the enslaved folks would chop down the trees on the place they would eventually plant cotton. But first you had to clear the indigenous. You understand? What's mine is my legacy of struggling here and fighting here. Africa is mine, though. That's my blood. This story is mine. America is mine in that way. But when you go to the actual thing, the actual reservation, and you see our indigenous brothers for real and the plight that has been left them, if you ain't moved to want to stand in a room and be their voice when they not in that room, something up with your heart, I can't tell you. But that's how I reconcile that. I just had to see the facts as they are. I'm an African. That's what it is. With American paperwork, praise God. I'm an African with American paperwork. Thank you. Thank you.
We're dismissed.